Welcome to Subconscious Elements, a podcast where we talk about exploring the subconscious mind, developing ourselves spiritually. We're currently going through the gene keys, and we are on the third gene key. And I'm joined with my co-host, Tori Setliff, and she is going to get us started on the third gene key.
All right, so the third gene key is basically the transmutation of chaos to cosmos. And they explain this as seeing the world through the eyes of a child. And so at the lowest frequency, you'll see that there is chaos, and this can be described as basically just kind of going with the flow and not really like directing your energy towards any one thing, but rather being swept away by the flow. And through transmuting this, we move towards innovation and later towards innocence, which is essentially what we came into the world with, and just relearning how to be truly innocent and playing with the flow of life rather than going against the currents.
Right. And so I felt like one of the main things that was like a theme throughout this chapter was working together in unity. It was talking about how it is a natural but beginner's mind to only be focused on survival, and that we're supposed to transcend that way of thinking into working together with others. And it was saying how that's true for both the microcosm and the macrocosm, where the only reason that we exist today is because on the microcosmic level our blood cells were able to transcend and work together with other single-celled organisms. And then the way that we transcended as humans in the beginning was the ability to make a society and work together, divide labor, hunt in packs. So that idea of working together is what separated us on all these like different levels. And so it's kind of saying that the next thing is to like transcend these races, these factions, these countries, and to try to become more one.
Yeah, it was describing the single cell as the island mentality, and basically that we're programmed just for survival. But now that we've kind of surpassed that need for survival, we can become a multicellular organism. And it was describing that we usually think that the brain resides within the nucleus, but rather it resides in the cell membrane. So seeing this as working towards multi-cells, you can understand that. How else said that?
Yeah. Well, so it's talking about that we believe that the brain is in the nucleus of the cell, and that's where it gets its instructions. And so it has like this top-down structure of how the cell works. Like, this is where the brain is at, and it tells everything else what to do. And it said that, but if that were the case, that the cell would be locked into only fighting for itself, only caring about its own survival. And that, right, and that it's actually in the membrane of the cell, which is what allowed it to accept other organisms into its ecosystem so that it could utilize it, right? The classic example is the mitochondria. The mitochondria used to be something separate. It ate it, and instead of like destroying it, they decided to work together, whereas the mitochondria got what it needed, and the cell gets what it needs from the mitochondria. And so that specifically reminds me of jiu-jitsu specifically, but in the way that we learn. As I start to get better at coaching, I've been learning a lot about like the ecological process, that way of learning, and it essentially kind of states the same thing, that we perceive that our mind gives a top-down instruction, like has a top-down structure and gives instructions to the rest of the body. But new science says that the way that we learn is that the whole body is the brain, that the brain learns how to compute and how to act in space by moving through space. So it's what it tries to tell you is that your whole body is a part of the brain. And so that movement, like essentially the brain doesn't give instructions. It is getting feedback from, your entire body, and they work together simultaneously. So it describes, instead of like the brain passing down instructions, you're essentially getting instructions from multiple different brains. And I think with science now, we kind of know that there's a brain in our stomach, a brain in our heart, right? Our nervous system has its own brain. Like all these different systems essentially have their own set of instructions and their own goals, and that they all work together to kind of create what we perceive as like the brain. And in jiu-jitsu, that makes a lot of sense as well, as in like, I don't use my brain to do jiu-jitsu, I use my whole body. I'm not really thinking of techniques. My body is just reacting to them. A lot of times my brain does take in information and help me decide like the next step or planning the next steps, but my body will move independently of my brain. And so when it was talking about how the actual brain is in the membrane, it kind of was reminding me of that similar thing, that we perceive our brain as like, oh, here's where the instructions, and it tells everything else. But the more that you do sports, you realize that it's all working together. Your arms are giving information to your brain's giving information to your arms, and it's like this symbiosis relationship, not the brain's telling the arms what to do.
Yeah, they were saying that the brain will reside in our more complex solar plexus rather than the actual brain itself. And that this will in turn allow more emotional comprehension rather than just logical. But yeah, I also thought that it was very interesting how it was breaking down the science and religion portion of the gene key, saying that on one hand we have religion that separates us apart from a God, and then you have science that separates us rather than our genes. Yeah, our genes from nature, basically. So it's saying like we kind of blame genetics for the reason that we are, instead of taking control and...
Right, that nature is more powerful than us.
Yes.
And then the one side was the religion, and that really reminded me of the new podcast that came out on Andre's podcast. And I'm pretty sure his name was Robert Gilbert, Dr. Robert Gilbert. And he had that same thing, that was like a dichotomy within all of humanity, which is to lean heavily on either religion or science. Religion on one side, science on the other. And that was mainly because, the main ideas from those two are that one is to transcend this life, where you use religion to be higher than this life, and then there's like the materialistic side, where everything is about just this life. There's nothing outside of that. And he was saying that we're constantly straying to one side or the other, and that was like one of the main purposes of human existence, is to balance that line of both transcendence and being materialistic, right? It's like he goes into talking about how the Eastern traditions are more into transcending this life, where you become a monk and you live out in the mountains somewhere, and you're completely separated from what normal humans call reality, whether it's city living or American living or European living or living in a big city China. Right, same thing with like monks or even priests, where you just like, you give up everything in this life. But then you have the science side, where everything is material. Like, can you prove it? Can you see it? Can you smell it? Can you test it? Can you test it multiple times and come up with the same result? And that everything that we can't prove doesn't exist. So then you tend to find those people are living in the big cities, and they're on the phones and the cars, right? So they're the most tied to this existence. And then you can see how that becomes a problem in of itself, because then you don't have anything outside of this existence to rely on, right? So it becomes shallow, all the accomplishments and all these things. So he was just saying that we're constantly balancing in between those two things. And he had like these, I want to say like Latin or Hebrew words for it. It was very interesting. But in this book, it's split it between religion and science, or nature, religion and nature, I think.
Yeah, and the thing with the artificial intelligence, and you can see those new glasses that they just came out with, and how it's saying that it's creating like a fake comfort, like artificial comfort, and we're like moving through the world as separate as possible, and it's going to create like a divide between humanity and nature even further.
Yeah, that was really interesting because it's pretty much talking about how like these glasses are disguised as being more efficient, more effective. And that was like it was like an after school episode. Y'all could go check that out. It's after school be putting out some of the best stuff out there as far as spiritual science and just concepts and ideas. But it was saying that these glasses are being portrayed to us as being more efficient, right? You can like see anything anywhere and have like a lot of control, but that actually what it's doing is splitting us into two separate realities of humans, where like a certain subsect of humanity will exist in a completely different world because they're going to see a completely different world, and it's actually bad for us. And one of the main things about this chapter, the third gene key, was about efficiency. That the main reason that we need unity and to work together is for efficiency so that we can survive. And that makes a lot of sense to me because in studying survival, one of the things that you learn is that it's not survival of the strongest, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the most efficient and the most adaptable. Those are the two major factors, efficiency and adaptability. Great example is like there are no really like large animals, whereas millions of years ago, it was all really large animals. And now, like, you know, so there's like the megalodon. Well, now all exists is the shark. And the sharks are known for being like just tanks of creatures, right? They can survive in all these crazy conditions. So again, adaptability and efficiency, and that's what this whole gene key was about, was efficiency and adaptability, right? It's also talking about how everything's about change and that we have to constantly be acclimating to the change. But yeah, that was really interesting. So because this was talking about efficiency, and then this new thing that's coming out now is these Apple glasses, and they're being portrayed as super efficient. It's going to make you better at work, and you're going to be dialed in. You're going to be tuned in to what's happening. So that's a pretty interesting thing.
Seems like a recipe for overstimulation, in my opinion.
Oh, for
It's
sure.
like this lifestyle is already very stimulating, and we're already being pushed with more and more ideas, more information, more innovation. And so this just seems like a recipe for disaster. I mean, I saw a guy wearing these glasses while doing things online and also in the driver's seat of a Tesla. So it's like, what is going on? And it's like anything can happen at that point. You really...
It's like, where are you?
Yeah. It's like, come back to this reality and you're dead. You got in a wreck, didn't even know it. You're like, oh shit. Come back, he's in heaven. He like takes the glass off. You're like, where am I?
Yeah, and the freaking... You speed through time and you're in the future world or something.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that with these phones. You look at your phone now, if you have like a newer phone, one, it's crazy that they can get brighter and more colorful with each phone. But if you have I can tell between the 14 and the 15. Yeah. I look at your 15 compared to my 14, I'm like, well, I need a new phone because this is bullshit. But no, so like, I'm a content creator. You're becoming one. And you already know it's consuming, just trying to be in the world, not be consumed by it, but also take part in it, right? And then, yeah, you're looking at this thing, and then you like look away, and your like eyes have to even adjust to like reality. And then, you know, so I got my workplace right over here. I got a huge PC with 2 screens. I got a laptop. I have 2 iPads, 2 iPhones. And a lot of times when I'm working, I have an iPad up, I have a computer up. One of my computers, either my laptop or my PC running. Sometimes I got to do both because one is acting stupid. And then I also have my phone. So I'm looking between 3-4 different screens at one time. And then sometimes I'm just like, like looking around like, oh, shit. And then it's your eye. It seems like even your brain is addicted to looking at a screen.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'll just be dead. I'm not even looking at anything. I'm just looking at the screen. Not even actually mindfully looking at what's on there. It's just like I'm just used to doing this. And we can all, I'm sure we sense how dangerous that can be, right? But just this ongoing battle of, we want to use it to our advantage, right? I feel like I'm on the front line of like accepting technology and learning about it. And, there's always this idea that if you're one of the first adopters of these new techs, that you could really like make a breakthrough, right? And that's what this whole thing is one of the main subjects inside this gene key was like, but being able to synthesize information. And a part of that is being in it, right? You have to be almost a master of the fundamentals or what it is that you're doing to innovate. You can't just like jump into a topic or a skill and just like innovate the thing. You've got to be fully involved and in it to an obsession level to be able to innovate or to synthesize information. Like, how do you synthesize information? By collecting enough of it, right? So
we all play a part in that, but it was also saying as long as we are a part of life, we can never truly be a master of life because we are a part of it. So it's like, even though you have to be a part of the piece in the puzzle to be fully delved into it, it's like that is necessary, but also transcending it is even further necessary for the further involvement of it. But
yeah, well, I feel like that balance. I feel it every day of like doing enough with the technology, but also not being brain dead on my phone the whole time, which can happen very easily. You get into
all these new video games and everything is just very, very tempting.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even have time for games, but we love it. We love video games, but we barely even have time to play them. And we used to like regularly play Call of Duty, and we just had to quit playing because you play and then you're up till 3 a.m. and you're like, what the fuck? And you didn't do anything, and now you're tired. Yeah, I played. I like to link up with my brother, and I played with him last night. We're just catching up, playing Call of Duty. I only lasted like 4 or 5 games, and they were mini games, so not even like full battle royales. No, it was like 5 little mini games. I was like, dude, I gotta go to bed, dude. And it was like 9:30. He's like, oh really? I stay up late every night. I'm like, dude, I can't, dude. It's like just too much stimulation at this point. Yeah, too much stimulation, and I know that if I keep going, it'll take more to satisfy me the next time. But just this whole idea of unity into efficiency, synthesizing the information, I feel like we're really seeing that play out right now.
yeah, whenever you're talking about the larger animals, and I was just thinking about the Neanderthals, and that's basically what we were told is why the Neanderthals were wiped out of existence, is because of their lack of willingness to communicate with other groups and tribes, and they just kind of stuck to their own and survived as long as they could. But if they would have been more willing to branch out and try to communicate, they could have possibly lasted longer.
Maybe I could have got some Neanderthal genes. Freaking big Daniel Manasoyu is one of the top grapplers in the world, and he released his genetic 23andMe, and they said that he had more Neanderthal genes in him than 99% of everyone that submitted a test. So he was in the top 1% of humans on Earth out of all the people that have submitted tests of having Neanderthal genes. And he's 300 pounds. Everyone says that grappling with him is like grappling with, not only is he like 300 pounds strong, but he's stronger than a regular 300 pound person. Like stupid, brute strength. Yeah. Just a mongoloid of a man. And he's not even that big. There's other humans where you're just like, are we the same like DNA? Like, what? Yeah, for real. Like, I feel like I'm super blessed for my size. I'll see other humans and I'm like, man, I'm glad I'm not that guy. but I'm still not even that big. I'm only 6 foot, and then there's just the differences in the sizes of humans is
Yeah, and it's said
hilarious.
that we're going to continuously get smaller, which is kind of scary.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the efficiency and the adaptability, it makes sense that we're going to get smaller. And, you know, it's hard to understand that because if you kind of look at most of humanity, especially like if you're on the Western side in America, people are getting fatter. So it's like hard to maybe see that we're getting smaller, but I do think that as a whole, we are getting smaller.
Yeah. I'm usually the biggest woman in the room most of the time.
Yeah.
It's like I don't really see a lot of big women anymore.
I don't really see a lot of big men. You go in the Marine Corps, everyone's short. You know, there's every now and then, you know, and honestly, by the time I see people my size, they're not even my size. They're just fat. You know, they're not actually even like. I feel like the number of capable men in this world is definitely going down, but who freaking knows? What else you got over there? I was geeking about the innovation piece. It was saying how like you have to have like a higher consciousness level to be able to innovate. And, you know, if you don't know what that means, I feel like some people might hear that. Like, what does it mean to have a higher consciousness level? Like, how do you get there? And I'm not saying I know the answer, but I have experienced that. When we went to the mountains and we did LSD with our buddy Tyler, we were out literally, it was so beautiful. We were in a yurt, so not even a cabin. We were like in a tent in the middle of nowhere. It was freezing, but we had a fire going and the stars were beautiful. We took a little bit of LSD, probably way too much. And yeah, it just came to me. We were watching something on Netflix. It was a spiritual.
Oh, have a good trip.
Yeah, it was Have a Good Trip on Netflix, which if you're into mushrooms or thinking about trying them, maybe try them once or twice, you should definitely check it out. It's a great show about people who have experienced it, celebrities and people of that nature. But we were watching it and it just came to me, like just this idea just popped in my brain that the majority of people in jiu-jitsu cared way too much about the techniques, and that techniques weren't really a thing. That was just our minds putting in a box a certain movement and then naming it something, and that jiu-jitsu was much more complicated than that and a lot more integrative. And it was really hard for me to explain that in the moment. I remember trying to tell you guys, and you guys were like, "What are you saying?"
Yeah, we were in our own worlds.
Yeah. And then even coming back and then thinking about it and trying to explain to people, it was super difficult. But it's been probably 3 or 4 years since that day, and now this whole entire way of looking at jiu-jitsu called ecological process is just kind of like sprouted out of nowhere, and they're all saying the same ideas that I had that night, where it's just like, yeah, we shouldn't be mimicking techniques and drilling them, that it's more about play, and that these positions are all just specific to the individual, and that we're all doing it wrong by showing our way of doing it and telling people that's how they should do it, that jiu-jitsu is more about play and moving, which if you really think about it is kind of like the same thing that this whole thing talks about, where it's not like
Structure.
yeah, it's not like this structured like top-down way of going about jiu-jitsu. It's integrative, and we all learn from each other, and it's all about like moving through the space, right? Like actually doing the movement is how you learn, not watching it and thinking about it, which you can learn from that way. But I think the argument is that it's much more efficient to do it that way.
Yeah, there are a lot of like mental professionals that have rather not delved into the
Space of what they have proclaimed as their profession, if that makes sense. Like a lot of mental territory with school and everything has kind of created this separation in that sense as well. That they can be a on paper professional, but rather if you're in the field, can you mimic exactly what you know? And that's kind of like the difference. It's like knowing and being able to do what you know. Mm-hmm. It's like two separate techniques and arts in its own sense.
Yep. Yeah, I was talking to one of the B-team guys on the podcast the other day, and he was just saying that he feels like he's the best instructor when he is out there doing it. Like when he said it, obviously it's hard to be both a competitor and a coach, but he said he feels the most dialed in when he's actually out there on the front lines doing shit.
And trying things out and like speaking from experience rather than speaking from something that you learned.
Right. Or, yeah, like a practice room.
It's like, yeah, you can teach these things all you want, but can you pull them off? And if you can pull them off, then I think you should be teaching it. But if you can't, then it's only really a suggestion at that point, you know.
Yeah. And I really think that's where the whole like innovation thing comes from, right? Where you're not really thinking about techniques. I think if you think about techniques, I mean, maybe you can find some variation of something somewhere, right? Maybe you like these specific set of moves, and within those specific set of moves, maybe you find like your own little specific set of moves. But I find that the real innovation is coming from those who are thinking about concepts. Again, that higher level of thinking beyond the techniques, like concepts of just like fundamental principles that are true in multiple areas. I mean, you've seen the way that I teach. My favorite way to teach is, what can I show you that applies in a bunch of different places? Like what concept can I show you? Maybe I'm showing you the concept through techniques, but the techniques themselves are trying to teach you a concept that applies to grappling as a whole. I find that the best coaches are the ones who think like that. And right, it's like the best coach in jiu-jitsu is John Danaher, and he was a philosophy major. And I don't know if he actually got his doctorate, but if that doesn't like clue you in to that there's more to jiu-jitsu than just jiu-jitsu itself or the physicality of it, it's like this dude learned how to think logically in a specific way, and he uses that in jiu-jitsu, and it has allowed him to become the best instructor of all time, right? Like, he's definitely currently the best. And it could definitely be argued that he's already like all time the best. If not, he's top 3. And so, yeah, just that idea of looking at things from a higher perspective can allow you to innovate. Because I feel like that's what G.D. Souders is doing too with the whole ecological process. He's not doing any different techniques for his guys. He's actually letting them play and figure it out for themselves. And together they're coming up with a whole different way of going about jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm. As a unit rather than a single. Yeah, I can tie that into, in that same sense, it's like, well, one athlete cannot be very successful without a whole team backing them. It's like the same sense that you're only as strong as your weakest unit. So like getting everyone else's perspective can help you shape your own and grow from there. But I was going to tie it into bartending because I've been doing that for a while. But in the same sense that you were saying that you have to see from a higher perspective, I think in the journey of getting to that higher perspective, you have to become a master of the smaller aspects. Like you have to be so precise and like so focused and so detail oriented that you're able to perform these tasks so perfectly efficiently that you no longer have to put mental energy into thinking about doing these tasks. You can be doing something like autonomously while also doing other things, multitasking, in a sense that whenever I'm making drinks, I don't have to think about the recipe, I don't have to think about the counts or anything that goes into it. I already know, and me putting any extra energy is just wasted. So in that sense, I can do these things while also talking to other people or, planning steps and steps ahead. So, and trying to get other people to get there is the difficult part, because you have to have people that can understand where they're at and that they do need to improve. Because a lot of people, they're just complacent and they get there and they're just doing what they always do. But actually having like that drive to become better and willingness to see your own faults and strive towards better.
Yeah, it reminds me of strategy in jiu-jitsu. It's really hard to implement strategy if you're not first a master of the techniques, right? It's like, sure, you could do like maybe like I feel like most white belts, they're just struggling, right? I think maybe at blue belts, maybe you think of like an easy push-pull thing, but you really don't start like implementing like really hardcore strategies until like brown belt, really. Like, I think purple belt, maybe like basic strategies, but super in-depth strategies don't really start to come into play until brown and black belt. And that's when you're a master. That's when I mean, that's how I think about it. You can't implement a strategy of multiple techniques if you have to work yourself through the technique first, because then you don't have the mental space to think of the strategy. But if the techniques become second nature to you and you can apply them easily, you can, just like you're saying, because I can do them without much thought, I can take a second in a higher dimension and like plan the stuff out. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sequence these together. I'm gonna set it up with a push-pull and a fake and a feint, and then I'll get to where I want to be.
Yeah, because most white belts, they go into the world, they don't even remember anything that happened. They just basically black out because they're just so they're so overstimulated, and they're in like deep waters. They just don't even remember. Or
In blue belts.
yeah, most blue belts also. I will also say that I was just promoted to blue belts kind of recently. So in the beginning, I definitely was not to the caliber of blue belt. Yeah, but I'll say at least having a little bit of time as a blue belt, now that I can see the difference within my own practices, that I'm actually aware of what's happening, and I can kind of start to sequence things together, but even then I'm not as efficient or precise with my movements. I still kind of do random stuff sometimes, and you just kind of zone out and you're like, oh, you kind of daydream a little bit.
No, I still daydream. Second something's not challenging, my brain will start daydreaming. So yeah, try not to make this a jiu-jitsu podcast, but yeah, one of the last things I had written down here is it was just talking about how everything's constantly changing. That the entire idea of this whole study is that everything changes, and that's what actually opens up room for innovation. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because you would think going into jiu-jitsu that everything's already figured out, that the best guys in the world already know everything. But as me and you have experienced, there's like new shit coming out every couple of weeks. There's a new move out, or one that you haven't seen before. And so, yeah, there's a guy from Colorado, Officer Grimy. Yeah, he's like, because he used to folk style wrestle, he's been coming up with like this position called high ground that, I mean, maybe it was around before, but I had never seen it. I've never seen anyone like popularize it or make it a thing. I've never seen it in competition. And now he's making it a thing because he was a master at grappling in his own way through folk style wrestling. He kind of has like this new take on a certain position, and now it's starting to gain popularity. And I've been playing with it, and it's a lot of fun. Same thing with the buggy choke that a white belt created, So in jiu-jitsu, you see that there's constant innovation happening. A lot of people still say it's a baby sport. And then I see the same thing in content creation. Everyone thinks that it's like oversaturated, but it's really not. And if you're in it and you're like a part of it, you can see that there's still room to grow. Yeah, there's still, and it's hard if you're like not doing it. It's hard to think of like new ways to be innovative, but the way that you do it is by doing it all the time. I see it in myself that as I do things more and more, it's like the ideas of ways to make things different or slightly better or more effective comes to me more naturally because I'm constantly doing it and I'm constantly in it.
Yeah, but unfortunately you can't skip the step of doing it and just thinking your way through perfection. You have to do it, mess up, and recalibrate. And that's what the Jinkies was saying also. It says if you're not constantly changing and evolving, and then you're dying, basically. So I see that a lot whenever I'm doing psychedelics. It's like you get into your own pathways and ways of doing things without maybe even consciously seeing these things. But once you do psychedelics, it basically just wipes. It's like a refresh. And so you come back to your life in a different perspective, and maybe you're not so attached to the things that you were before, and you're able to see like, oh, why was I doing that all the time? I could do it this way. And then so you just start to like recreate your life, even though it's the same, but you're just improving on small things, just touching up the details.
Yep. Yeah, some of the biggest concepts here were just some stuff I've written down, but it was like the shadow is chaos, right? And it was just talking about how there really is no chaos. That chaos, it was originally meant to be primordial space, which essentially just means like the vastness of which everything comes out of, right? And then I've heard this concept before is like any chaos is just a pattern unrecognized. And that everything has a pattern to it. It's just a matter of perspective of like how far can you zoom out.
Yeah, and it's like you see that with black belts in jiu-jitsu. It's like once they get to black belt, you see them restart to white belt. It's like they've learned all these things and they can see in their own ways how they can improve, so they just restart the whole game.
They don't actually like restart the belts, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Just for those wondering, they don't actually switch back to white belt, but
They switch to like a different level.
you actually become like a white belt of the black belts, because the saying is that the journey doesn't start until you become a black belt, which is really trippy if you think about it.
Because it takes so long to get the black belt.
Yeah.
There's a whole separate journey after that.
Yeah. Yep.
The infinite game.
We were talking about, I just brought up we were talking about innovation into innocence.
Oh, it was just saying that chaos is basically just the difficulty in the beginning. And how you're saying that it's not, doesn't really exist. It's just the difficulty in the beginning and like being in a place where you're not familiar.
Right, and then it was saying like you want to give into it. The more that you give to it, the easier it becomes. That's like you hear that a lot, especially if you've ever read of any Sadhguru's stuff. He says a lot of the same thing, like to even say that trusting the universe is like not even that high. It's like to trust the universe means that there's a opposite of that. But he's like, the universe is taking care of you, and you just need to go with the river, not try to fight it. And that most of us are fighting the river.
Yeah, it's like that meme where it's like you on the cliff, and then it's like a hand, and it says me, me, and then it's like them flying, and it says me, and then it's like the God hand, and he's like also me.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Well, that was Subconscious Elements. This is the third gene key. We'll be back again next week with the fourth gene key. I thought these things might get easier, but it seems like they're getting more and more complicated. But the main purpose of this, again, is just through our exploration of these gene keys, we are finding that we're learning more about them, and they help us in our it seems like whatever we're learning currently in life applies to the gene key that we're
very synchronistic.
Yeah. So we're kind of going through this journey together, and we hope you guys are experiencing the same thing. We appreciate y'all.